Okay, everybody, welcome to this week's Storage Unit Auction List weekly webinar. This week's topic is on 7 pieces of tenant research to collect before bidding. So these are pieces of information that we think are important for you to have as a bidder at a storage auction, and also what we believe are the 4 best ways to get that information, and we get pretty in-depth into that as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. If you do have any questions, if you'll hold them till the end, we can take questions and unmute people, one at a time, so we don't have too much static or feedback. Also, you can just use the chat or the question feature at the bottom of your little console that everybody should see on the right-hand side of their screen. If you have questions and you're afraid you're going to forget, just go ahead and chat them in there, and then at the end, I'll be able to review all those and answer any questions that everybody has. Okay, so why collecting data is important for your business. And so you can see we've got the magnifying glass and the pieces of the puzzle, and I thought that that was a pretty good explanation in and of itself. Obviously, it's sort of like a puzzle in terms of all the different data that you're going to look at and everything you're going to want to know about the person before you bid on the unit where their items are stored. You have to become a little bit of a detective to get that done. And we think it's really important because it might not always yield really great results or a lot of information. Sometimes information is just not going to be available, but sometimes it can give you a pretty good idea of what the tenant might have been storing there before they went delinquent, what their business was, what their hobbies were, their overall lifestyle, their marriage, anything that would give you any sort of clue into more about them and what might have been stored in that unit is going to give you a better understanding of how you should budget yourself before the auction for that particular unit. So, knowing that somebody's might have a business full of merchandise that they maybe owned a store previously, that's, you might want to bid higher. Or on the flip side of that, knowing somebody is in a lot of legal trouble and you don't know what you're going to find in that unit, you might want to avoid it or pay like a bare minimum for it. So obviously it's all just pieces of a puzzle that help you get to know the tenant beforehand. And we give you a lot of information in this in terms of different research you can do. Obviously, every single time, every single unit, you might not always feel the need to do as much research, but we do sort of feel that you get at least a couple of things such as their name and address, things like that, and we'll go over all that more. But just because it gives you the edge on the competition, and long term, it in most instances will pay off to know more. So with that, we're going to start with the 7 pieces of research we think you should have. So there's 7 pieces of useful information. So the first is the tenant's name and address. Because without these, you can't really do any sort of research. It's kind of the basic level of what you need to start any other research. And luckily, in most states, according to the law, it's required that that information be part of the facility, the notices that they send out in the paper and online. Usually the name is definitely always required, I believe in most states, as well as a lot of times their current address according to the facility's records. Now obviously that might not always be their accurate current address, which is sometimes why these units go into delinquency, because people move, things like that. However, it gives you a starting place to be able to find more information out about them. So obviously, somebody's name, really, in terms of the name, it's going to be luck of the draw. If you get a John Smith, that's going to be a lot harder to find the specific person you're looking for. However, if you get a very unique name, obviously that's going to be easier for you to start your research. And then once you do have the name, usually you also have the address in the listing that the facility is placed in the paper. And so once you have that, you're going to be able to do a couple of things. One of those is that, just to start out with, even if you don't do anything else, you can use that information to do a Google Earth search. And what that's going to let you do is just get a street view of the home that is listed, or the apartment or the condo, whatever is listed on there as the address. You can then look at that location, and that might give you some understanding about the market value of the home, the neighborhood, the person's income, and so on. Now, obviously, it's not definitely 100%. They, might make a lot more than what you might imagine from where they live and so on, but again, it's all just little tiny pieces of a puzzle that add up to a bigger picture. So the second item is a criminal record, and so one of the things that you might want to research before that you go to the auction is to try to find the person's, if they have any sort of criminal record. In some instances, you can simply do this by pulling up Google and typing in the person's name and address, and a lot of times that will pull up information on them. There are also some other ways you can do that, and we'll talk more about those later. Okay. The third piece of information is judgments, liens, and bankruptcies. This type of information gives you additional information about the tenant and their current financial situation, which might give you an idea of what's in the unit. For example, if somebody has a lien on their car, this might point to the car is being stored to try to avoid that car being taken. So if their business is going bankrupt, this might be a sign that you're going to find some merchandise in that unit that they're trying to hold on to. The fourth piece of information is marriage or divorce. Is the tenant married or divorced? Now, if they've recently been divorced, this might point to what's in the unit itself in terms of home goods and their property and things like that, and we'll talk more about that later. The fifth thing is their profession or any professional licenses that they have. Are they a merchant? Do they work in the legal field? Do they work in the medical field? What do they do for a living? Because no matter what the profession is, usually there's certain things that people collect or have a passion for. For example, my grandfather for years owned a bowling alley, but before that, he, in his very early 20s and 30s, was a lawyer, and he for years held on to, he just loved these old law books, and they're at this point they're antiques, and my family still has those. So he just had a love for that, and so he held on to that. So that's just one example of what you might, in terms of somebody's profession, giving you information about what they might have in the unit. The next item is hobbies, and so this is item 6, and this is their hobbies or collections. So we'll discuss later kind of the best way to find this information, but knowing what their hobbies and collections are or what they're passionate about might give you an idea of what they might be storing. So they might be a collector of antiques, sports enthusiasts, the list goes on and on and on. Any little valuable piece of information you can get might point to what's in there. And then the last one is other storage units. And so this is the number 7 on the list. And this is important because it really kind of gives you information about the person and what might be in the unit. For example, if you type in Jane Doe, and you can find this out by doing a Google search. So if you type Jane Smith and then plus auction or and auction, you can quickly see if they have other delinquent units that are currently up for auction. So if you can see somebody has 5 different units or 6 different units across a county or a couple of different counties, that sometimes might be a good sign, but a lot of times it might mean that you're dealing with somebody who is just like obsessively hoarding or compulsive, and they're you're going to find a lot of trash and things like that. However, on the flip side, it might mean that somebody is just storing a lot of merchandise or a lot of something, but and you might have a really good unit on your hands. It might be part of a larger set of storage that they're doing. But usually, if that's the case, they store at the same facility. So if they're storing kind of randomly across all different facilities and a lot of them are going delinquent, that might be one you kind of want to avoid just because it might not yield such great results. So those are the 7 tips for what we think that you should try to collect, and we'll talk more about how to collect those in just a little bit. But before we do that, just sort of as a disclaimer, we want to put out there what is private information versus what is public information that you can readily access. because that's important for just for legal purposes and so on. You just want to know what that is. So private is any information such as somebody's social security number. Obviously, that's totally private. You're not going to want to access that at all because that can get you into a lot of trouble. The date of birth, people's medical records. I believe it's HIPAA is the medical. It's very strict. It's very, in college I had to fill out about 10 different forms to be able to send anything to my parents for my insurance purposes through my school. It's very strict. So medical records are way off the radar, as well as anybody's like financial information such as, now a lot of what we talk about is sort of related to somebody's finances, but specifically things like their bank account information or their insurance information, that's all going to be private. Also, anything that's related to somebody's business, such as their undisclosed business practices that have not been published or not out there. Anything such as like a non-patented formula or design or a process that they're working on, that's all private as well. Now, sometimes this information becomes public, and you can access it legally and ethically, and there's no qualms there. For example, one that's pretty common is later we discuss talking about using social media such as Facebook and Twitter, things like that, to research a tenant. And a lot of times people will post their birthdays on their Facebook. So if you can just go and click on their Facebook account and see their birthday, they've obviously made that public information if you can see it and they haven't made it private on their account. So that might give you an idea of who you're dealing with and to see how old your tenant is. So again, sometimes these things can become public and you can access them pretty easily, but other things, obviously, such as somebody's social or things like that, are pretty much always going to be private. So public records are generally anything that falls under government records, and we talk a lot about these in just a few minutes. But usually this includes real estate records, court records, the bankruptcies, liens, and judgments, any of that, professional licenses, intellectual property filings, business records, and so on. Luckily, most of what falls under useful information for you as somebody who's going to be attending an auction also falls under the public domain. So a lot of what you need, it's public anyway, and you don't have to worry about not having access to it. So there are four basic ways that we suggest you getting this data. The first one is by contacting facility management. That's sort of the most basic, common thing you can do just to sort of dip your toe in and see what you can find out pretty easily and without putting a lot of time behind this. Sometimes it might be worth it to spend an hour doing research. Sometimes it's not. So start with a facility manager and see what you can get that way. However, it's important to note that they might not always be comfortable giving you any information other than what they're legally required to give, which is the name and the address most times. So a lot of times facility management, they would much rather have somebody just pay their bill. And they, for them to go through the process of holding an auction, it takes a lot of time and logistics and effort, and they have to hire somebody to come in and be an auctioneer. And it's not something that they necessarily love as part of their business, and so they might not always be super friendly about giving out information. So it's, get what information you can, be polite, be respectful, don't badger them, don't constantly contact them over and over again. But, if they're willing to give you information, that's great, and it's a great starting place for you to get an idea of what's in the unit. But just remember, for them, this is not, sometimes it's a bit of a headache. So yeah, just always want to be respectful because, again, you're attending auctions probably at the same facilities often within your area, so you don't want to sort of burn any bridges or upset any management. So the second item here is to search databases, and so by that I just mean things like Google and Bing. That's a great place to get started. It might not always yield exactly what you're looking for, but it might yield just what you know already, which is their name and their address, that kind of information. But sometimes it might return things like their phone numbers, pictures, social media profiles that you weren't aware of, and any additional information. So there are some people who suggest Some other various sites that are specific to finding people. They're search databases, but they're specific to finding specific, individual people, as opposed to just more open-ended searches that you can do on Google. However, in preparing for this, I did a couple. I spent about an hour going through and comparing my results on those types of sites versus what I found on Google. And honestly, a lot of times I found more information on Google that was available to me for free, because these sites are free sites. However, a lot of the information within them is not always free. You might be able to get a few things for free, and then you have to pay for additional information. So a lot of I found more information on Google that was more accurate than on some of the other sites that are more specific to finding individuals using name, phone number, etc. So the third way we suggest finding this information is using social media. So Facebook is obviously sort of the most popular social networking, and also in terms of the setup of how it's designed, it leads, because there's a lot of profile information and a lot of specific categories, and people can fill it in and edit it whenever they want. That gives you a little bit more information than something like Twitter or even Instagram, things like that. However, it's good to access whatever you can. So if the person only has a Twitter, that's fine. You can use that to your advantage. But Facebook is sort of, I think, the best way to research. It's especially, you can get things off of Facebook that you can't get off other sites, such as their relationship status. We already talked about their birthday, their contact information. You can see their hobbies, and also in terms of the actual social media itself, you can see who they're talking to and how they're communicating and how often they're communicating, and get an understanding of what's going on in their life and why the unit might be going delinquent and so on and so forth. And again, it's like pieces of the puzzle, like we said at the beginning. For example, you might find on Facebook that somebody is younger than you had expected them to be, and so you can look and see, oh, well, that person has moved 5 times in the last 4 years. Well, maybe that's not somebody who's they've probably moved a lot, because they moved a lot, their things have probably moved a lot. They might be damaged, they might not be in great condition. Also, they might have been slowly getting rid of things as they move. Maybe that's somebody whose unit I don't definitely have to have. Or you might also then see them and look at their Facebook profile and say, wow, they have a lot of hobbies that might lend to things being in the unit that are very valuable. So it just gives you an understanding of the person a little bit better. In some instances, obviously, their profile is going to be private. I know that through the years, Facebook has gotten, their privacy laws have changed, and they kind of constantly change and update, and so people are sort of always kind of trying to constantly combat anything that Facebook is trying to give away to people who want to buy that information, to harvest it, to sell to people. So a lot of times it might be private and you might not have immediate access to it, but a lot of times if you friend somebody, they'll friend you back without giving it a second thought. So you can try that, and obviously if they don't friend you back, that's okay. There are other things that you can do to try and get information on them, but you don't know until you try. So the other thing with social media that might be helpful is it allows you to see if you have any connections to the person whose unit that you might be going to buy. So you can see if you have friends in common with them or anybody you know in common with them, because obviously it's a delicate situation. You would never want to try to sell something back to somebody who knows the person whose unit has gone for auction, or to sell to that person. So that it's kind of a way to just double check on that, just so you make sure that you're kind of handling it with discretion and avoiding any awkward, uncomfortable situations. So fourth way that we suggest gathering information is through public records. And so that's through the next couple of slides. I think there's 3 slides on that. We'll talk about that. So like we've discussed previously, there are a lot of public records that you can access online or by visiting your local courthouse or local facilities. Not all of these things that I'm talking about come directly from the courthouse, so we'll talk more about that as we go through each one. But a lot of records, surprising amount of records, are available if you just do a bit of digging for free through open channels. So the first of those is real property records. And so you can visit the county assessors a lot of times to get and review property records of somebody. And so that's where the address comes into play that you got out of the notice. You can look and see if they own the property that is listed as their last address. Also, if you have used social media or Google search and found other addresses, you can look up those as well. That's just going to let you know in general if they own their property, if they're moving around a lot, if they are in lots of different properties, and just their general larger financial standing. And again, the criminal records, you can do the quick search online. Also, I believe a lot of times you can visit the courthouse in your county to get that information. I believe it's and again, that's just going to let you know, are they in jail? Is that why the unit has gone delinquent? Or what's going on with their specific legal situation? The next one is civil litigation records, and that's broken down in a couple different things here, which is lawsuit, divorce, and probate records. And so these are normally found at a county or district court level. And again, they just help you to give you a larger picture of who the tenant is and get as much information as possible. So lawsuit records, this is important because it lets you know if the tenant is being sued or vice versa, if they're suing somebody else. It lets you check the address, like you can check to see if the address where they were served, if they've been served in a civil suit, if it's the same address that is listed on the notice. You can, if it's not, you can again look up that property information. Another important factor to consider in talking about lawsuits and lawsuit records is whether or not a final judgment has actually been issued on the suit. And then you can also, if it has, a lot of times you can look into the documents regarding the hearing on assets, and if the tenant was the defendant in the civil suit, a lot of times there will always be a hearing in terms of their assets and where they would be under oath, and then they would have to divulge all of their assets, which again is very important to you because it lets you know exactly where they're standing and again gives you an idea of what might be in the unit then based on that amount. Also, you can always assume that there might be more than what they've divulged. So again, that's another sort of a heads up. The next one is divorce records. And this is important because a lot of times in divorce settlements and in those records, they talk about a division of property and assets and belongings. And a lot of times this is really valuable because it might tell you specifically what that person currently owns. They own a set of leather couches. They own a large screen, flat screen TV. It gives very specific things like that a lot of times. And so it lets you know what might be in the unit, or conversely, what type of things might be in the unit. Like maybe they don't have those exact items in the unit from the divorce records, depending on when that took place. But then a lot of times people's tastes don't change that much, so it gives you a good idea of what they might own. And then probate records are records that deal with the disposing of a deceased individual's property. So as you can see on the slide, the last will and testament. By this point, if you've gone this far in your research, you've probably already assessed whether or not the person is still living, whose unit has gone up for auction. But a lot of times you might think, well, if they're still alive, I don't need to look for probate records. But that might not always be the case because a lot of times they might have been named, not a lot of times, but sometimes they might have been named the executor of the estate of somebody who has been deceased, which means that they are then responsible for administering the final wishes of whoever they've been named to do that for. And so they might have a lot of property or things like that that they have not administered yet, and that has not, they might not have completed that yet, and so then that might give you an idea of what is in the facility where they're storing things. So those are the 4 ways we suggest that you get that information. We do suggest that you save your money with pay sites. A lot of times you can find online, pay $20 to see somebody's complete criminal record across the entire country. And really, those are not always very reliable. A lot of times they lack information, or the information that you're paying for is inaccurate and not true or not complete. Also, it's impossible to get a complete database of somebody's entire history across the entire, like an entire country like that. It's always done state by state, so you'll have to pay to look state by state. And that's a lot of money, and the point is to make money and not to spend your money. So we think that really a lot, and furthermore, a lot of what they do list that is accurate, you can get yourself. And a lot of times, just depending on the type of site, they're restricted access, and you have to be a law enforcement, private investigator, an attorney, etc. You have to be someone in a legal field to be able to even have access to that. They make you, even if you are, and they make you jump through a lot of hoops. They do all sorts of interviews, and they visit your offices and a lot of things to be able to even get access to the information that you need, when in reality you can do a lot of it yourself. It may take a little more time, but you might get a lot more accurate information that way. So every state is different, and it is important to let you know that the differences in public records, they vary a lot state by state in terms of what is available as a public record, as well as how you're able to access this information, and also the names of the government entities that the records are held by. So for some states, they have one database, you can search it. That database gives you all the information you need for all the counties. In some states, it's split up into different databases. In some states, you can get things all online, but in some states, you have to go to offices. So it really depends on the state that you live in. So you're going to want to do a little bit of research before you get started in your state what those laws are and how you can do that. So I know that this seems like a lot of effort to put into doing research before you attend a unit. We gave you several different things to do and several different types of records to look for. And so you might decide that you don't always want to go through a full-on investigation of somebody before you attend a storage auction. And that's okay. We understand. Sometimes you might look at somebody's Facebook and realize they're really young, or they don't have nothing that I think I can sell. I just don't think I'm going to find anything in that unit that's for me, just based on their hobbies and things like that. And that's okay. We definitely say, doing any little bit of research is better than doing none, and it will definitely give you the advantage over somebody who's done, no research at all and is just, showing up. So also, it's important, just the sort of last note here is, while you can do all the research in the world, and it is great and it will help you long term, don't sort of turn a blind eye to what you're actually seeing in the unit on the day of the auction. Somebody says on Facebook that they are a classic car enthusiast. That does, if you don't see a classic car, then don't bid like you might find a classic car. That might mean that you should factor it in and say, well, maybe they have smaller memorabilia and things like that related to classic cars that might be worth some money. So obviously you want to factor it into what you're seeing on the day of and not just go solely on that research. Because, just because somebody likes classic cars does not mean that they own a classic car, or even if they do, does not mean it's going to be a classic car that's in good shape that you're going to be able to sell and really turn a profit on. And obviously the point is definitely to make the profit. So really just factor it into what you see on the day of. If you see a unit and it's just a dud and there's just nothing in there, bid based on what you see first and foremost, and use the research to really supplement that and help yourself just with a general idea of what might be inside that you can't see. So that wraps it up. I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions now. I see that we have some questions while let me go ahead and pull those up. Let's see. This is from Leonard. Are the storage unit contents gone through by the staff at the facility before the auction? That's a really good question, and we get it a lot. It really depends state by state how this works. In a lot of states, the facilities are legally required to open a unit before an auction and take a general inventory of what's inside. So for whatever they can see inside the unit, if they can see a TV, they say there's a TV. If they can see boxes, they say a TV and boxes, unidentified boxes or miscellaneous boxes, because they have to include that in the notice that we talked about earlier that they send out. In some states, people do, the facilities can actually remove completely the units to sell them, and they can sell them either as a complete unit that way still or piece by piece. So even then I believe that they still have to wait until the day of the auction to really go through all of the specific items. So if it looks staged or if it looks too good to be true, obviously kind of back off that unit and try and find another one. But typically they're not supposed to go through specific contents. Okay, we have another from Chris. Newspapers are dying. What else can you go for lien notices? You can use the internet. A lot of times Google search, you can find those lien notices in various places, because even though a lot of newspapers, traditional style paper format are being discontinued, those same newspapers are still available online, and so you can find that same information just using a Google search, using somebody's name, or there's a section in the paper for it. Okay, let's see. We have another question here, or comment. I'm not sure. Let me read this. I'm sorry. Private facility owners sometimes remove valuable items and leave unwanted stuff. That's true. I guess sometimes that happens, but again, by law, they are not supposed to do that. So if that's something that you're seeing pretty regularly, you might want to find new facilities, because that's, by law, that's not something that they should be doing. Okay, I have another question here. Are facility employees obligated to tell the names of default tenants when asked? In most states, yes. In most states, that is part of the notice that goes out through the papers or through the internet, through Google, that you can find. So typically, yes, they give out the name of the tenant, and sometimes, depending on the state, or I think in most instances, the address or the last known address according to the facility records as well. Okay, Michael, I think you're asking about what I said about Google and seeing if somebody has multiple lockers. You can do that just by going to Google, and obviously you get the name from the facility or from the notice, and then you just type in the person's name and then use the little plus symbol or the word and then type storage auctions or auction, and then that will typically turn up any delinquent auctions that they have other than the one you already knew about. Okay, I think I answered. So I'm just clearing these off to make sure I have not missed anybody's questions. Does anybody else have any other questions? I'm going to go to the roster here and see if anybody's hand is raised that I missed. It looks like nope. If anybody has any other questions unrelated to, now's a good time to throw them out there. Okay, I'm going to keep going here. So if you do have questions that we didn't answer today, you can always contact us at our 800 number with those. 800-353-8417. We do have another question from Chris, and I'll answer that in just a second. Email at info@storageunitauctionlist.com. You can visit on the blog. So on the blog, we try to post at least one to two times a week with informational blogs, related to the history of items or how to sell certain items and so on, so related to the business. And then several times a week, we also update the blog with information about the webinars, how to register for those, how to watch those after the fact, and just any other information that we have going on. We have updates, new features and things like that on the site. So stay connected to the blog and to get all that. And then you can also follow us on all the social media, which we check daily, which is the Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Pinterest, and Tumblr. So we're a little bit everywhere. Or you can email me at teresa.t@storageunitauctionlist.com with any questions that you have related to the webinar specifically or anything else. If I can't answer you, I will forward you on to usually our customer support staff, who are excellent and have answers to everything, and thank goodness for them. So we'll get you to somebody who can answer a question if I cannot. So let's see, we do have another question here. Let me go ahead and pull out a question panel again so I can see the whole thing. It says, I'm new and the vets bid me up. How do you deal with that? Well, obviously, that's going to that does happen. Especially if they can tell that you're new. Sometimes the vets like to let you know that you're the new guy, and that's okay. That's sort of the trade, and like anything in life. But really, there's no one specific way to deal with that, except for to just try and learn as much as you can about specific units before you go, to try to constantly attend as many auctions as you can. Storage unit auction list, we list tons and tons of auction information from all over every state in the country. And so, maybe that allows you to find it. We have 30% of our listings you cannot find anywhere else. So by subscribing and signing up, you get information that not a lot of other people in terms of nationwide have. So that gives you an edge on the competition to be able to attend auctions that not a lot of other people might know about or be able to easily access. Just kind of keep your head to the floor, try and be very choosy on the auctions that on the specific units, and really bid only on what you can see. So a good rule of thumb, so that you're not losing money and then not being able to bid again, is to look at what's inside the unit, what you can see. So let's say that's $100. You believe you can make $100 on the unit, and then only pay $50 for that unit, because then no matter what, you're going to at least break even and make $50. So always try and bid about 50% of what you can see. Now, a lot of times you're going to have way more success than that, and there's going to be way more in there. But as a rule of thumb, bid on only what you can see, and then kind of half that amount to try to always at least break even. Because then over time you're going to build yourself up, and when you do find that unit that you strike it rich on, your big unit, then you're going to obviously have more money to go in and be able to sort of compete with people who do have a little bit deeper pockets than you might have as the new guy. So I hope I answered your question. And again, we host on the blog all sorts of topics related to that and other things. So kind of try and read the blog and keep up with that. And we love hearing ideas for blogs and things like that, and what you guys want to read. So always feel free to message us and let us know what you'd like to read about. Let's see. We have a question from John on subscriptions. It says, can you give your subscription prices and how long each subscription covers? Well, we have two types of subscriptions. We have month-to-month subscriptions, and then we have year-long subscriptions. And I do not have off the top of my head the list of all 50 states in terms of how much each of them cost. I do have it at my desk. I can email that to you, and anybody who's interested, they want to shoot me an email, I'll email that to you. And so typically the longer ones cover 1 year, and then unless you cancel, they recur after a year. Okay, I see from Chris and then from John. I'll send to Chris and John. So if anybody else wants that list, and again, if you have questions about that, the customer service, they can, on a dime, give you all that information at 800-353-8417. Let's see, we have a question from Leonard. Do you need to register with the storage facility at the auction? That's a great question, and yes, you definitely do. So that's why we always suggest getting to the auction about 15 minutes early, because you do need to register. Typically, you'll need your driver's license to do that. And that's also when a lot of times you pay the deposit fee, as well as any other fees, some buyer's premium and things like that. Those are a little less common, but sometimes there are additional fees and things. So you do all that at the beginning and you register, and they give you a ticket with your number on it as a bidder, and then you use that throughout the day to bid. So yeah, you definitely need to register, and that's always required, so get there a few minutes early. Okay, do we have any other questions? All right, we have a comment from John. He said, don't get into a bidding war. It is not emotional or personal. It is a business. And that is an excellent point. And so I know a lot of people watch the TV shows, and they are great in terms of entertainment value, and they make really great shows. And, you know, I'm a fan, and I love them, and I like watching them. But, you know, sometimes the bidding wars, it's a little over the top. I'm not saying that doesn't sometimes happen. I'm sure it does. But just remember, it's a business, and you do want to be there to make money, and you don't want to have personal issues or drama with anybody else that's there, because you know, those people can then become people that you maybe sell to. Maybe you don't know how to sell a certain item, or you're not sure where to go. You know, the people that you attend the auctions with are people who you can maybe sell to, or they know where to sell certain things. So, you know, use them as resources. Realize it's a business. Keep it professional. Keep it polite. They might not be your best friends. That's okay. But you want to make sure it's on a professional level at least, because that's important. And, you know, if you're somebody who is having issues like that, a lot of times, you know, the facilities, they catch on to that, and they don't want somebody there that's going to cause, you know, a lot of unnecessary issues. So it is wise to play nice at auctions, somebody said. That is definitely true. So yeah, it's just reiterating what we're saying. And then let's see, we have another thing. Only bid on units, this is from John as well. Only bid on units you actually want, or you'll end up getting bidded up also. Yep, that's another good point. You know, it's not smart usually to kind of try and like upbid people, or, you know, I guess if you're the person with deep pockets, and that's your prerogative. But usually it's pretty smart bet to just bid on what you actually want and what you actually think you can make money on, and not try and just bid willy-nilly on units just to try and, you know, get somebody else to dump all their cash. Because, you know, if that happens, then you'll become a target, because people, you know, will then do the same thing to you, payback. So you don't want to get into a bidding war. You want it to be professional and not have any issues like that. Let's see. Somebody else said, I go to small town independent auctions, and it's not common for them to have registering for the auction and other rules. Huh. Okay. Well, that's interesting. I mean, I've never heard of that. I mean, I think usually most of them do require you to register, but I guess it's possible that some, if they're small enough, maybe they don't do that. But I think, you know, 99% of the time, I think they do require you to register. And then somebody asked, is there credit associated with these webinars? We do give a discount code at the end of the webinar, and so we can get to that now. But I just want to catch everybody's questions first. That we give out, it's a 20% coupon code this week, and that can be used towards an additional state if you're already a subscriber, or if you're a new subscriber to your first state. So do we have any other questions? If we do, that's fine. I'm gonna go ahead and give the coupon code, and then if we want to continue answering questions and talking, we can definitely do that. But some people are on a time crunch, so let me go ahead and I'm going to stop the recording.